All right, hello everyone, and welcome to Best Delegates World Model UN Day panel event, specifically titled Where Model UN Will Take You, Careers After Model UN. We're super excited to bring together a panel of champion Model UN alumni who have done some really cool things following their Model UN careers. And we firmly believe that this is a really great way to show the Model UN community just where Model UN can take you and how all of these skills translate to college as well as future careers and beyond. So I'll begin a little bit by introducing myself. Hello, my name is Georgina, and I'll be hosting this panel event today. I am currently one of the Model UN mentors and program managers with Best Delegate, but a little bit about my Model UN backstory and how I wound up where I am today. So I started doing Model UN when I was in 8th grade, and it was because I was absolutely terrified of public speaking. So I'd get up in front of a crowd of like 5 or more people. Step 1, my hands would start shaking like crazy. Step 2, my face would turn as red as a tomato. And step 3, I would want to run off that stage as fast as possible. So I had a friend who I considered to be a mentor at the time. She was like, hey, you should try this really cool activity called Model UN. I walked into that first club meeting and I never looked back. But aside from helping me overcome that fear of public speaking and gaining a lot of really cool skills, Model UN really inspired in me this passion for international relations and learning more about the world around me, which led me to study at Georgetown for university and continue to work abroad after graduation. So I spent a year working for a Model UN company in India, a couple months volunteering with an NGO in Morocco, and then was with the Peace Corps in Thailand before returning to Best Delegate. And all of that was because of Model UN. Now you'll hear a lot more of where Model UN can take you from our champion panelists, but just to introduce myself before getting into things. So what to expect over the course of this panel event. I'll begin by explaining a little bit about why Model UN is such an awesome activity and the difference that Model UN can make in students' lives in terms of building key skills and expanding that awareness. From there, I'll introduce our group of awesome panelists who are incredibly excited to share what they've done with their own Model UN experiences. Then we'll have a discussion about where Model UN can take you. So specifically how Model UN led them to where they are today. And we'll end with a couple of Model UN opportunities that are open this year in terms of ways that you can get involved in Model UN. So why Model UN? What makes this activity so impactful for students, and how does it help students gain those key skills? In any given Model UN committee, students are given the opportunity to step into the shoes of global leaders. So they're no longer taking on that student role in a classroom. Instead, they're empowered to take on this leadership perspective and really go about learning about a country's policy. And they prepare to solve real world issues. For example, the evolving situation in the Ukraine or the situation in Afghanistan. And it prepares students to think of solutions and positive ways forward from each of these global conflicts and each of these pressing global challenges. And how exactly do students go about that? Every Model UN committee can be broken down to 5 stages. So research, debate, negotiate, resolution, and action. And over the course of those 5 stages, students work together to come to a consensus and to find ways to use the skills that they learn and the foundations of diplomacy to work together to solve each and every one of these pressing challenges. So a little bit more about the impact that Model UN can have and kind of that impact by the numbers. Model UN reaches such a broad range of students every year. At Best Delegate, we've had over 10 million unique visits to our website, which shows how big this community is and how much it's going to shape the next generation of future leaders through those career paths that they embark on. We've also had over 795,000 views of our Model UN resource videos and published over 2,500 articles geared toward helping students learn more about Model UN, learn more about the world, and develop these skills. We've also had over 6,000 students and 600 teachers complete our Model UN Institute. So again, this is a massive community, which I know all of you watching are also a part of. So our goal is, again, to show you where this community can take you and what you'll get out of this experience and where it'll lead you in terms of your future career. So in terms of that global impact as well, these resources have been used in all 193 member states. So it's truly a global community, and every member then gets access to a network of like-minded peers. and a network of resources, and the ability to consider how they want to use what they've learned moving forward. But enough about the impact of Model UN. It'll clearly serve you all better to hear more from our panelists about what this actually looked like and get that first-person perspective about where the Model UN experience can take you and how that can inspire future career paths. So I'm going to begin by having each of our panelists introduce themselves. And from there, we've got a series of great questions lined up to just analyze how Model UN as an experience can help you get to whatever career it is that you dream of having one day. So with that, Angela, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Georgina. Hi, everyone. My name is Angela Menyiho, and I'm currently working as a policy analyst for the Government of Canada here in Ottawa. I started doing Model UN in high school and competed as a Model UN delegate throughout high school and moved into teaching and organizing Model UN in my university career. I worked as a MUN mentor for Best Delegate throughout the summers of my university career with a focus on helping students learn English through Model UN. Thank you for having me.
Of course, and thank you so much for being here. Erik, if you'd like to introduce yourself next.
Sorry about that. Still learning the mute button 2 years in here. Hi, everyone. I'm Erik Leiden. I'm a consultant at the Boston Consulting Group, where I support the federal government around a lot of DoD strategic initiatives. I started Model UN in high school as a delegate, then in college at Ohio State, where we started running Model UN conferences and continuing to compete at different Model UN conferences. And then I spent 4 years working at Best Delegate, helping organize the Model UN Institute and a lot of different Model UN conferences and workshops around the world.
Awesome, some very cool stuff. And Caroline, if you'd like to go next.
Sure, and thank you so much for having me. My name is Caroline Rose. I am currently a senior analyst and the head of the Power Vacuums program at the DC think tank, the New Lines Institute for Strategy and Policy, where I analyze a number of different international conflicts of interest to US interests and recommend policy options for the United States government. My journey with Model United Nations started in high school. In sophomore year, I joined the club then as a delegate. And then I went on to college to compete as a delegate. And then like many of my colleagues here, ran conferences, ran the team, and then of course, contributed a lot with Best Delegate as a MUN mentor, where I taught Model United Nations, conference organization, and a number of other leadership skills to students of all ages.
And you've been incredible to work with over the last few years. And last but certainly not least, Frankie, if you'd also like to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello. Hi, my name is Frankie Hill. I am a confidential assistant at the White House, specifically in the Office of Management and Budget. I started doing Model UN freshman year of college, just for fun and activities and for friends. And I kept doing it through all of college. I spent a summer as a diplomacy fellow at the Model United Nations Institute by Best Delegate. And now I am here.
And thank you all very much for joining us. And unfortunately, it seems like Lima Benla is having a few Wi-Fi issues, but she might be able to join us later. Just a brief introduction of Lima. She is currently an international development consultant at Northeast Leaders Connect and is also the founder of Northeast India Model UN. So she's done a lot of work with students over the past few years, as well as expanding Model UN and really working in that development field. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and bounce straight into some of our questions and get started with our panel discussion. So I'm going to unshare my screen and kind of bounce straight into things. The first question I have for all of you relates to kind of the foundations of Model UN and what this activity is all about. So how has Model UN expanded your awareness of international affairs and broadened your perspective? And if you've taught students, how have you seen it do the same for them? I think, Angela, I'll start with you for this question.
Absolutely. I think one of the most unique experiences that I've had in Model UN is relating to the ability to learn about an international issue and step into the shoes of a diplomat for one weekend. And that experience has greatly contributed to my ability to succeed in an academic or professional context, because you often need to deploy that skill of learning about a particular file or a policy problem on the go. And I think that I've seen the unique advantages of Model UN manifest in our students as well. When they step into a diplomatic or political position they're not familiar with and need to learn about a very nuanced political issue, on the go, it's quite challenging. It really pushes them intellectually to develop a new perspective. I also think that the diversity of Model UN participants is quite unique, whereby you have people sitting next to you who are from entirely different backgrounds, but taking on a different hat for the weekend to discuss these issues.
Definitely. And I think, Caroline, given that you also kind of work in the realm of international relations and international affairs, I'll pass the same question over to you. So how did Model UN expand your perspective, and how have you also seen it do the same for your students?
Sorry, I had to get the mute button. I think it absolutely defined where I wanted to go with my career, and then also my understanding of international relations as a whole. And also I think human interconnectivity as well, like diplomacy, how you relate with people, how you get to work with people, and building momentum that can lead to an agreement and lead to understanding. And so for Model UN, I think also one of the biggest benefits that it's given me, and I've seen it with students of mine as well, is that you can learn about international relations from a textbook. You can study all the organizations, you can memorize them, but nothing beats the experience of going in weekend after weekend into a committee and learning these procedures and essentially emulating them, emulating a diplomat, and going through the motions of how the UN Security Council or how the UN General Assembly works. And I think that after doing it for a few years in my career, I now have to, especially with the crisis in Ukraine right now, there's a lot of talk of the UN Security Council, what it can do. And with some of my colleagues and some of the people I work with, there are a lot of questions procedurally, what can happen? And it's funny because I'm not a scholar of UN procedure, but just from years of doing it over and over and over, you get to really understand some of these different procedural differences and how things work and how things don't work. So absolutely, I credit Model UN entirely for that.
Absolutely. And I think everyone here can definitely relate to that knowledge of procedure. And I also really like what you said about that interconnectedness, which I feel like is so important these days, just given how divisive the political spectrum has become and the number of emerging conflicts. That ability for students to connect with one another beyond borders and through these topics is just such an important skill moving forward. I think I will throw this question over to Erik last, just because you've taught so many students as well. So how have you seen this also kind of expand your perspective and translate to student success?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I came from a small town in Ohio. So both of, Angela's main points, where you're not exposed to these issues and you're not exposed to people from outside of your community nearly as often as you get to be in Model UN. Both of those were huge opportunities. Learning about the different challenges faced around the world, debating them, putting myself in the shoes of, different international delegates of different international issues was part of it. Working with students from around the world was, I think, the most intense part of it. And so I've seen this happen working with even some of Lima's students in Northeast India, helping them, have to negotiate on behalf of countries that they considered their adversaries. I've also seen this. We ran an event at Ohio State around the Ukraine crisis. This was during the Euromaidan times. But I've had some of those students text me over the past week and say, "Oh my gosh, I know all this stuff. This is things we discussed years ago." To have that context on something happening on the opposite side of the world is a really unique opportunity that I really enjoyed, and I've seen a ton of students go through and really learn about the world in a way they wouldn't have been able to otherwise.
Definitely. And I also feel like it's so hard to get that context these days as well, just given the mass media overload and the number of push notifications you get about every global event in terms of figuring out what's truly going on. And Model UN can definitely be transformative in terms of that space. So to move on to my next question and kind of get a little bit more into the skills for Model UN, Frankie, I'll start with you for this one. So how did Model UN help you grow? And what skills did you gain from Model UN that translated to both college success and success in your current career?
Absolutely. So one of the big things that you have to master when you're doing Model UN is communication between a bunch of different people. And especially it's a bunch of different people who you have just met most of the time. So after college, I went and worked on a presidential campaign. And I was out knocking doors in the middle of rural Iowa and meeting people literally on their porch steps. And I needed to figure out what was important to them, why they should be supporting my candidate specifically. And I had to do all of that on the fly. And so Model UN really prepared me for those conversations where you're sort of probing to figure out what is most important to them, and then immediately working that through the frame of reference, through your own policies and your own priorities, and figuring out what is it that I can say that will help them to understand exactly why my candidate is the best candidate for them. That's a huge skill that I learned from Model UN.
Absolutely. And what about you, Caroline? What skills do you think that you learned that have helped you get to where you are today?
Well, I think, definitely, I think one of the most obvious answers is public speaking. I think that for anyone that goes into Model United Nations, you're going to come out a better public speaker. It won't be overnight, but the more you do it, the better that you'll get. And I think that certainly that was a skill that helped me. And like you, Georgina, I started out in Model UN with a huge stutter and a lot of shyness and I was very intimidated by the prospect of doing public speaking. And I think that absolutely helped me. But certainly the other skills, interpersonal skills, really trying to see the others' set of way of thinking, way of understanding issues. I also think that decision-making capabilities, that was incredibly important, especially for those that did crisis simulations. I think that was incredibly important. And I also think that understanding and empathizing with other actors, as Erik mentioned, trying to really understand how countries think through issues, what their imperatives, what their constraints are, and what kind of processes they're willing to implement to get there.
Definitely. And it creates overall just a ton of confidence in students in both that public speaking ability and a lot of these skills in a really transformative and unique way. Angela, I'll throw this one over to you last. So how did Model UN help you grow, and what skills did you gain that have helped you to get to where you are?
Yeah, I would absolutely concur with what Frankie and Caroline said. I mean, the art of interpersonal connection, of diplomatic persuasion, and the ability to stand up for the issues you believe in and provide really insightful commentary. I mean, I see Caroline delivering these incredible interviews on behalf of her think tank and think, wow, like I would have never imagined someone would have a stutter before they did Model UN. I think I would add to their answers in saying that for me, the most useful skill that I employ on a daily basis that I learned from Model UN is research and writing. And I know it's not the most glamorous parts of Model UN, but the ability to be well-versed and inform yourself of a particular issue area, and then use that information to inform a written document that would be, for example, for senior management or to brief a political official, for instance. Those are skills that I find myself using all the time. And in Model UN, you typically draft a position paper to submit to your chair in advance. You draft a resolution with the fellow negotiators in the room at the conference. And all of those experiences helped me sharpen my ability to be a good writer and a good collaborator in the workplace.
Awesome. And I think you touched on something really important there in just how translatable each and every one of these skills are, and even at the high school level for students who are currently doing Model UN today, in terms of helping students with in-class presentations, helping students to do that research for papers they write, and then helping students to really problem solve and be able to write those analytical essays. So a lot of these skills really do translate beyond the committee room, and that starts right when students start their Model UN journey as well. So to get a little bit more into specific Model UN experiences, Erik, I think I'll start with you for this one. So what would be your most impactful Model UN experience that you can remember, and why specifically?
So I would say my most impactful Model UN experience came after my time as a delegate. And it was actually as we were organizing the Wafuna International Model UN Conference. So YMUN was this huge conference every year in New York that I was lucky to have a role to help organize. And one of the kind of culminating years of this conference, we had over 1,000 delegates, and they were from, it had to have been 60 or so different countries. We had schools coming from Palestine, we had schools coming from Israel, we had schools coming from all sorts of countries that you wouldn't normally see at a Model UN conference, joining us to debate in the UN GA Hall. It was really impressive to see Model UN reflect the real UN in that way, that you had that same level of diversity, that you had, discussing the same issues directly from the UN agenda. To see students engage on that level and make speeches that were totally passable as real speeches that would be made by a diplomat at the UN was incredible. And for myself, a lot of our staff that year were former students of ours that we had worked with through Model UN. And so seeing Model UN, take people that were originally just delegates and take them to the level where they're leading a conference in front of over 1,000 people in the UNGA hall, seeing that growth that was spurred by Model UN leadership skills was really touching for me. And so that was my most impactful experience.
Absolutely. And to speak a little bit to what you just said as well, Erik, I think on more than one occasion, I've seen students give speeches in Model UN committees that are on par with, if not better than some of the speeches that our current world leaders and diplomats are giving, which is so cool to see in terms of imagining the future of global leadership and specifically where Model UN will take the future of the world. So Caroline, I think I'll also pass this question over to you. Do you have any specifically impactful Model UN experiences that you can remember that have helped you in terms of inspiring your current career?
Definitely. I have actually two, funny enough, and one is related to Erik. When I was a diplomacy fellow with the Model United Nations Institute in the summer, I would say of 2017, perhaps, or 16, Erik essentially established one of the crisis committees, and the topic was the Suez Canal crisis of 1956. I enjoyed that simulation so much to the point where I became really interested in the Suez Canal crisis of 1956. And in fact, did my master's dissertation on the Suez Canal crisis of 1956. The research capabilities, as Angela just mentioned, very much contributed to this, all the research that we put in that summer to this crisis committee. And it sparked a lot of passion and interest for this subject. And that dissertation, of course, helped me in my career. It helped me get into my graduate school. And it's something that I'm still very enthusiastic about, even though it's, a historical crisis. Another thing that I think was incredibly helpful was a crisis committee that I did at the West Point United Nations conference a few years ago when I was back in college. And that was a really excellent learning opportunity to learn how crisis leadership, how that's enacted within the White House National Security Council, and then also how much it takes for a military operation to happen. And they were incredibly realistic with all of this. And really, it wasn't necessarily an experience where we all got to show off our public speaking skills, but rather we really got to learn all the different processes and all the different planning procedures that need to go into conducting a military operation. And that, to me, to this day, many of those lessons I remember even in my work now.
Caroline, is that a map of the Suez over your shoulder as well?
No, it's although Egypt's on there. Yeah, I've got a few Middle East maps behind me.
I will say, I echo your sentiments. I too have a particular soft spot for the Suez Canal crisis in 1956. I think I did that committee 3 or 4 times while doing Model UN in college. Definitely a great one. And you touched on a lot as well in terms of just the breadth of knowledge that you can get from doing Model UN and that niche information that you get about so many of these topics and just the way that the international community works in terms of addressing conflict situations, for example, that you wouldn't typically be able to learn just through doing this research on the web. So there's definitely a lot that comes out of that. So to move on to my next question, which I'm going to ask all of you, how did or do you explain Model UN when applying to college or when applying to careers? I know that this is a question that's top of mind for a lot of current Model UN participants who are thinking about highlighting this on their college applications, in their essays, as well as thinking about careers moving forward. So I'll start with you, Frankie. How did or do you explain Model UN when applying to college or applying to jobs?
It can be tricky sometimes, but it's, I think the thing that I like to start with is I was very involved in running a lot of Model UN conferences, which is a great opportunity if you ever get the chance. And you can pitch that often as management experience, as event planning experience, as even policy conference generation experience if you're in my world. And so that's one great aspect of it. But then beyond that, just really, you tailor your application to whatever you're applying for. but you can really play up different aspects of it, whether that's international affairs or policy or public speaking or politicking. Whatever aspect of it really jumps out to you based on what you're applying for. It's such a versatile activity that you can really use it in just about anything.
And that's really great advice too, in terms of the way that it can be tailored to match any given job or any different university, just based on the skills that you're looking at or the general topic or field. Caroline, what about you? How do you explain Model UN when applying to college or applying to careers?
I think that Model UN is an activity where you can go in so many different directions. As Frankie mentioned, you have management skills if you host a conference, but also if you are taking and leading your team to attend conferences, that also requires a lot of budgeting, a lot of coordination with leadership, with teachers, with advisors. And then also, of course, coordination, logistics, all of that. And again, for high schoolers to be doing this and for college students to be doing that, that's incredibly impressive on a resume and an application. And then, of course, advocacy, being passionate about issues, and standing up for yourself. You have a project now, you have an organization that you really care about, and you care about how it performs. I think that there's so many ways to market Model United Nations on a college application, and there's just a lot of potential that students have when they join Model United Nations.
Absolutely. And it's very cool too, just the number of leadership opportunities that become available to students through Model UN, and then their ability to use those when applying to jobs or college, for example. Angela, what about you? How do you explain Model UN when applying to jobs, college, etc.?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Frankie and Caroline in that it's really quite a widely applicable experience depending on your audience and the purpose of your application. I would just add that, for example, when applying for a government job, you can demonstrate through Model UN experience that you understand the machinery and institutions of government, as well as the ability to be diplomatic and have the political acumen to navigate, for example, your civil service kind of side of government versus the more political dimensions of an international organization, of a federal government, et cetera. And it's that ability to work through the intricacies of government that I think I started to develop a sense of through Model UN. I would also add that Model UN gives you great stories to tell. And I think increasingly applications to colleges or to jobs are about your personal narrative. So using the example that Erik brought up, for example, of MUN, it's not every day that you get to organize a project with a $250,000 budget that involves the UN headquarters, the Grand Hyatt in New York, and a number of stakeholders from around the world, right? And it's about giving that story, contributing to your skill sets, and explaining how you as a person grew to extents that maybe you wouldn't have imagined at the start of the project, that I think presents a really compelling case for a recruiter or for a college admissions officer.
Definitely. And from a lot of the past students who I've worked with too, and I actually read over 2 students' application essays this past fall for college, and it really is cool how inspiring a lot of these Model UN experiences can be, and the way in which students find ways to use that narrative and use it to explain now how that's translated to their current passions, as well as what they're looking toward doing. Erik, I will end this question with you. And if I'm not mistaken, I've also seen you teach this before to student leaders. So how did or do you explain Model UN when applying to college and jobs?
Yeah, absolutely. Model UN helps make you unique because unlike a lot of other student experiences you have, you might be the only student in your year of applying to college that represented Guinea-Bissau on the topic of nuclear nonproliferation. You get a lot of unique experiences. And so you take that situation, you're trying to show a school you have the academic chops to keep up. I think you can make the argument that if you wrote a position paper on Guinea-Bissau's nuclear nonproliferation strategy, you can probably handle the research requirements of the school that you're going to for papers you'll write for school. In my job, we do a lot of presenting to clients that we work with to try and convince them and get them to adopt solutions that we think will help them perform better. It's really intimidating for an employer to put a junior staff member in front of a bunch of really important people to present their work. If they don't think you're going to be able to stand up to the pressure to be able to present articulately, you'll miss out on opportunities. An employer needs to know that they can trust putting you in front of a client. Public speaking skill, if you can talk about something, not even representing yourself, about a topic that there's realistically only a couple of experts on in the entire world, and deliver a confident speech in front of 100 people, you can probably handle a boardroom full of 5 to 8 people, that you actually know more than they do on the topic in some cases. So these skills you can communicate in your essays, you can communicate through the leadership skills that you adopt, and when you're in interviews, the confidence, the public speaking ability, and yeah, like Angela said, the awesome stories of times that you actually had to negotiate with people, which is an experience a lot of students don't get until they're into their professional lives, can be a big game changer in your applications to college or in your future job interviews.
For sure. That was a very niche example, Guinea-Bissau's nuclear policy. Interesting, very interesting. So to move kind of back to careers as well, I want to kind of get into what advice you have to current Model UNers who are looking to get into your specific career path. So Frankie, what advice do you have to current Model UN delegates who are interested in working for the White House and kind of potentially getting into the Office of Management and Budget?
My advice is perhaps a little bit niche, but generally, if you want to go into politics or work in a desk job in DC, I would recommend starting on a political campaign and finding a candidate that you care about with policies that you care about, and going out and actually getting them elected, knocking on doors, talking to constituents. It's one of the most important parts about our democratic process. Making sure that the candidates are really grounded in the communities that they are representing. And one keeps the candidate honest, but it keeps you honest, and helps you to better represent the American people if you actually have to start by going out and talking to the American people. I mentioned before that Model UN gives you incredible skills to communicate with folks, and to talk to people on a human level. And I would recommend, if you want to move to Washington, DC, you should probably move to, some other community first, whether that's your hometown or the hometown of a candidate you care a lot about, and working for them and finding your way to DC a couple years after you think you want to find your way to DC.
So don't start in DC, work your way there. Let's see, Caroline, what about you? What advice do you have for Model UN delegates looking to get into your career path?
Well, certainly. So the good thing about if you want to go into analysis and policy in the world of think tanks, it's a really interesting career path where it's a revolving door with the federal government, with a number of other careers that revolve around the policymaking process in DC. And the cool thing about that is if you do Model UN, you have a lot of the tools already in front of you. You are engaged in an organization that is exposing you to a number of different topics. And my advice is if you're still in high school, if you're still in college, really soak that all up. Learn about the topics that you are engaging on, get passionate about the ones that are really interesting you, learn more outside of Model United Nations about it. And certainly if it's a thematic issue or if it's a region or a topic, really dig your heels into that, because I think that has been really incredibly important. And like I mentioned, Suez 1956, that was something that was kind of a case for me, but a number of other topics as well. My specialization is security in Europe and the Middle East. It's been a busy past few years, in that specialization, and Model UN really helped build that foundation of knowledge and that foundation of public speaking and other skill sets that I can employ today. The other day, actually, kind of a personal analogy. The other day, I was very nervous for a public speaking opportunity that I have. And I remember talking to my mom about it, and she told me, she was like, Caroline, if you think about it, it's a different level, but it's a lot like Model UN. And that has helped me quite a bit, thinking that, all right, this all stems from some of these similar experiences. Going back to what I learned at Best Delegate, going back to what I learned as a delegate myself, just in high school, those skills are still getting me through my career today, and really helping me. And so I'd say that's my advice.
Awesome. And I also really like what you mentioned there in terms of kind of Model UN helping you to figure out your thematic passions and your interests, because there's so many different Model UN communities committees that students can participate in today, ranging from different topics, different regions, different regional bodies and focus areas. And so there's so many opportunities for students to figure out exactly what area of the world they're interested in or exactly what topic, and to then use that to take them forward. Very cool stuff. Let's see. Angela, what advice do you have for people who are potentially looking to get into government work, maybe specifically with the Canadian government, maybe not, but generally speaking, government work?
Absolutely. So I think I would say two pieces of advice. First is try to articulate and explore your career identity as a generalist versus a specialist. And secondly, trying to build your career around learning and equipping yourself with certain tools. So starting with the first, just like you said, Gio, when you move to different Model UN committees and topics, you might discover that one particular area of international affairs is more for you than others. And for example, in my case, I discovered that actually I don't have one issue area that in my current state of work is the be all end all, which is why I tried to sign up and was very lucky to be accepted into a program where I get to rotate across government departments every 6 months. And so it's really using Model UN and every opportunity to learn about who you are and what kind of career you want. The second is, I would say, we hear a lot of advice about figuring out what you want to do and where you want to work. And I think every Model UNer at some stage in their life has wanted to work for the UN. And I'm certainly guilty of that. And I even built my master's actually around that dream, moved to Geneva for a master's of international affairs to be in that ecosystem of international organizations. But what I realized is that as much as I enjoy the work of being in a secretariat, for example, I was missing a piece of my learning and a part of my toolkit in terms of understanding domestic policies and understanding processes that lead a diplomat to sit at that table and explain what capital's view is, which is why I tried to pivot and go into government. So it's all about figuring out what piece of your learning is missing and how you can equip yourself in your career, as opposed to where do you want to work or what do you want to do as a result of these big names that you've just heard. So that's a piece of advice that I think is understated.
I love that. Keep an open mind and kind of continue to attempt to expand your toolkit, whether it be the diplomatic toolkit or just your general skill set, and keep working towards whatever that end goal may be, but flexibility in the meantime. And last but not least, Erik, what advice do you have for people who are looking to get into consulting?
Sure. So by nature, consulting work is really varied. I've had three main projects I've worked on so far. They kind of sound like Model UN committees. One was global health, one was energy, and the current one I'm on is defense. So when you think about how to prepare for something where you're not specializing in a specific field, two main pieces of advice I have. One, do as many different committees as many different countries as possible. Not necessarily in the hopes that you hit on a committee where you need that specific knowledge someday, though that'd be great. It's because you get really good at the process of learning new things and developing a framework through which you can kind of understand what's going on, putting some logic around this new set of information, these new issues, understanding what's most important and what are the key drivers. That's a huge part of consulting work. The other, and especially when it comes to applying to consulting firms, demonstrate a passion for learning fast. Wanting to learn new things and just dive headfirst into an entirely new topic is the most fun part of this job. And it's one of the most transferable skills from Model UN to any sort of generalist career path. This probably applies to rotational programs like Angela was talking about as well. You're going to spend a lot of time in that first 3 to 6 months of something where there's a lot of learning going on, demonstrating that you're ready to embrace new challenges, learn new things, instead of just doing the same Pan American Health Organization committee every single time you get the opportunity, shows that you have the kind of generalist skills to do a job like consulting.
Awesome. So a lot of kind of fast-paced adapting to problem solving, analysis, and just learning more generally about the world and all of these topics. So the last question that I have for all of you, and we're going to try and make this a speed round. So how would you describe how Model UN has continued to impact your life in one word? Yes, one word. Caroline, how would you describe in one word how Model UN has impacted your life?
Empowering.
Empowering. Awesome. Frankie, what about you?
Substantive.
Substantive. Love that. Angela?
Inspiring.
Inspiring. Excellent. And Erik?
Confidence.
Oh, I echo the sentiments of all of the previous speakers. There's a lot of consensus around here. Well, thank you all very much for participating in this panel. Do you have any final pieces of advice you'd like to share before I move on and kind of close things out? All right.
I'll jump in if there's no other thoughts here. We've said a lot about how to make the most of your Model UN experience. Don't worry about over optimizing it. You're on the right track if you're listening to this. Keep doing what you're doing, and that's already putting you on a great course.
I absolutely agree. Thank you so much for that final comment, Erik. So I would like to thank you all for watching our World Model UN Day panel event. And if you're looking for more information about Model UN, as well as more ways to get involved through Best Delegate, I definitely recommend you check out our website. So bestdelegate.com if you're looking for our blog, or learnmodelun.com if you're looking for specific opportunities. And very exciting, this summer we will have our in-person Model UN Institute returning to Washington, D.C., Boston, and Los Angeles, as well as our virtual Model UN Institute for students who are looking to get a little more practice, however, don't want to go through that traveling. So with that, I would once again like to thank all of our many panelists and thank all of you for watching, and wishing you all a very happy World Model UN Day.